This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Lime Illustrations. If you love quirky, colorful art transformed into fun, handmade stationery items, pretty much guaranteed to brighten somebody's day, that's just what you'll find in my new online shop at finelimeillustrations.com. That's fine as in I'm fine, lime as in the fruit, illustrations.com. Browse the entire collection or sign up for my email list to see some behind-the-scenes peeks into my studio. You'll also get first notice of new product launches and subscriber-only sales. And as an added little bonus, you'll also receive a free coloring sheet to help you relax and de-stress from your day. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As usual, I am your host, Melissa, and this week we're going to be diving into another mindset episode, and these are very popular for good reason, because I think this is the stuff we all really struggle with. And today we're going to be talking about embracing the business owner side of your creative business, which I think for us as creatives can be a bit challenging sometimes. We would really rather be creating and the finance and the admin and the marketing and all that stuff is just stuff that kind of feels like it gets in our way, or maybe we just don't want to do it. And there is a way that you can create and get rid of all the admin and finance tasks. But in order to do that, you need to be running a business that can afford to bring you in help. And in order to build a business to that point, you need to embrace your business owner side. And that is why I am very excited to be welcoming today's guest, Sara Roach-Lewis. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, for those of you who may not be familiar with Sara, she is a coach and advisor to creative business owners. She teaches us the strategies we need to claim our confidence and scale our businesses and make more money. Her first book, She Rules: What You Didn't Know Is Holding You Back in Business, is available for purchase on Amazon right now. And she is talking to me from Prince Edward Island, making her my first PEI guest, which is exciting. We have a lot that we're going to get into today, but we're really going to be poking some holes in those mindset issues we all tend to have around being business owners and wanting to maybe push back on being a business owner, or feeling that we don't deserve to call ourselves business owners. We're going to be talking about a lot of that today. So before we do that, though, the first question I ask everyone who comes on the show, Sara, is, did you feel like you were creative as a kid?
I think depending on the moment, yes, there were lots of creative pursuits in my childhood, and I was always surrounded by creative people. So with that, sometimes you compare yourself, but for the most part, I definitely had bursts of creativity when I was a kid.
I think all kids do.
Yeah.
And we somehow forget those creative moments as we become an adult, I think.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, I mentioned you're from PEI. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and what led you to becoming a coach for creative business owners. But you also work with women-led businesses and other types of entrepreneurs. So tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I live on Prince Edward Island. I grew up here, like all good East Coasters. I lived in Alberta for a while and then found my way back here. And I grew up in a fishing family, a commercial fishing family. So we can trace our roots back, about 16 generations.
Wow.
And so fishing was really in my blood, is in my blood. It is how we made our living. And so I grew up in a really small town. There was about 1,500 people. And I was really lucky to grow up in a household where my parents were okay with things that were different. My mom was one of the first wave of women who joined their husbands on the boat. So that was in the 80s. And before that, it was really to have a woman on a boat was bad luck. It was called a scris and it was bad luck. And so there was this whole wave of women in the 80s who were like, actually, this makes a lot of sense for our families for us to go fishing. And we're really not that, we're not bad luck. So I grew up in this house where there was this sort of interesting creativity. There was this interesting willingness to break rules and conventions, which I think has been really helpful for me. And then in terms of, I spent much of my career working in the not-for-profit sector and about a decade working for a feminist organization here on Prince Edward Island. And that really, again, it really shaped the entrepreneur that I became
Mm.
because I really spent much of my time not thinking about money, actually, not thinking about sales, not thinking about profit, thinking about how do I support women to make transformational change in their lives? How do I encourage change makers and policy makers to change the rules, to change policy, to better support women, to be the whole of who they are. So really looking at the personal as well as the systemic and structural changes that need to happen. So I feel like that's a bit of a unique path to then becoming a coach and an entrepreneur.
Yeah, definitely. I think too, having parents who were fishers, like there's some entrepreneurial spirit that comes from that as well, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that resonates with me when I think about artists as well, when I think about creatives, is the identity of fishermen, of fisher, is so strong and so deep that I actually didn't realize I grew up in an entrepreneurial
Yeah.
household until I was like in my late 40s. And I was figuring out my own business path. I was like, and someone said it to me, well, you grew up in an entrepreneurial household. I was like,
Yeah.
no, I grew up in a fishing family. And then it's like to unpack that, well, what that means is.
Yeah,
And so I
exactly.
see that with a lot of the artists and creatives that I work with, that sometimes that identity is so strong that it blocks out those other nuances of that identity.
Yeah. But you had parents who were modeling that for you from day one, and then to have a mom who even was willing to go and break some more rules and do her own thing, like that's some pretty strong role modeling you had there
Yeah, I was
growing
very
up.
lucky.
And it's funny how that just seeps into our being, and like you said, we often don't realize who our parents are until we get to be much older.
Often
Like,
parents ourselves.
yes. So I think that's very, very true. And I started your book. I wasn't able to finish it before we recorded, but one of the things that really struck me in talking about how you started working more and more with entrepreneurs, business owners, and with women was the language of war that we use
Hmm.
in business. And you talk about this quite a bit in your book, but I honestly had not recognized that either until I read it. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. No wonder it is such, like I could, seeing that, reading that made me realize why a lot of us creatives probably do push back from that a
Yeah.
little bit because it's some pretty violent language that we use.
It is, and it's really when we think about that, and that really stemmed from that question that I was asking myself, which is why do women, why do creative entrepreneurs often express that they feel uncomfortable or not confident in their business, even though it's theirs. And because I've spent so much of my life thinking about the world from a super big picture strategic perspective, what I started looking at is actually business in its, at its core, business was created for men. It was inspired by military strategy, and it was supported by, a woman at home doing everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we start thinking about both the language that we use, there's so much military language in our business world, is that the hill that you want to die on, command and control, even strategy and tactics. And so when you start thinking about that, it's not just the language, it's that the core of that military strategy, and Sun Tzu, The Art of War, is considered the Bible of military strategy, of business strategy. So it's a military book. I read it. There's lots of really great things in it. And when we think about what is the purpose of a military strategy, it is to win at all cost. And we are competing for finite resources. And I think that's part of what doesn't resonate with people when it comes to business. We have this outdated narrative that we have to be unemotional and logic, and we make these business decisions, and you can almost envision the stance and the three-piece business suit that people are envisioning in their mind when they think about a business owner. And so of course that doesn't resonate with everyone.
Yes. There is so much to unpack with all of this, but let's start with a very, very simple, well, I hope it's simple, question. That is, what is a business owner or an entrepreneur? Because I think this is something that a lot of creatives and a lot of women and women creatives really struggle thinking of themselves as. Like, the first thing that comes out of our mouth is we're an artist or a writer, right? Yeah. So
and I, over the last 2 years, I have had the absolute pleasure of doing a creative entrepreneurship training program for creative entrepreneurs here on Prince Edward Island. And the program is run through Creative PEI, which is a really fantastic industry association. And their mandate is something like to improve the incomes and outcomes of artists on PEI. It's something like that. It's really great.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a wonderful organization, and they do fantastic work. So they had asked if I would develop and deliver a creative entrepreneurship training program. And that's what I kept bumping up against in the first iteration of this program is, these are folks who are actors and musicians and writers and comedians and graphic designers. And they really resisted this idea, but like, I'm not really a business owner. Like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not. And finally, what I landed on is a very simple question. Does someone give you a T4 when it is time for you to do your taxes?
Yes.
Right? If the answer is no, which most often it is no, then the answer is you can call yourself whatever you want, but you are a business owner, and you can, like, that identity of actor or artist or creative or whatever it is, absolutely hold on to that, but also make a little bit of space for the fact that you own your own business. And there are a few things that you really should do in order to make your life easier.
Yes, I think the CRA, they really don't care what you call yourself. If you bring in money, you're a business. But yes.
Yeah. And so that That was actually really helpful for people. I've used that quite, that sort of
Yeah.
really simple question quite a lot now. And it does help people who are particular, like a particular kind of creative. You know, if you're a graphic designer, then you're probably a little bit more connected to potentially, depending on the graphic design you do, but there's more likely a commercial aspect
Yeah.
to your work as compared to someone who's a singer songwriter.
Yes.
It's very hard to pull back from that, identity. And so it's been very helpful in terms of helping people see that, own it, and recognize that it's not actually nearly as scary as you may think it is, because you're doing it anyway.
Well, that's just it. I think a lot of us are doing all the things we need to do to
Yes.
be a business owner, and we just don't necessarily frame it that way in our head for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And I think there's also a lot of pushback. And why do you think that is? Why do you think so many of us struggle with, if not entirely push back, the idea that we're running a business? Like, what have you found to be at the root of that for most of the people you work
Mm.
with?
There's a few things. Some of it is unlearning.
Mm.
So, one of the men who was in the last creative entrepreneurship training program that I taught has been a visual artist his whole life. He went to school. He went to, like, I don't know what you would call it, fine art school, whatever that's called. And one of the things that they taught in his fine art education, he would be in his 50s, so, 30 years ago, was that sort of that narrative around money is the root of all evil. You shouldn't be thinking, you should be doing art for the sake of art and not thinking about it from that commercial aspect, or how am I going to make a living out of that? That is going to ruin your art if you do that. So I'm paraphrasing. But that was really the messaging that he got. So I think there's a piece of that in terms of, there's that idea around the purity of the art, and how when we enter into the business side of that, it somehow degrades or erodes it. I
Mhm.
also think there is a piece around that. We have those narratives, and we have a narrative of a starving artist. And
Yes.
so I think sometimes people have felt like they needed to make that decision. Well, I'm deciding to be an artist, which means I am deciding to live in poverty. And then I think the last piece to that, or another big piece that I hear a lot, is that struggle around capitalism, and the struggle around how our capitalist society is damaging. And so people really resist being part of that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh goodness, yes. So many things there. And I think it's interesting too, because there's all these subliminal messages we get as we're
Mhm.
growing up, like, oh, that's very nice that you're really good at drawing, or whatever the case may be, but it's really important for you to go to school to get something that you can earn a living at,
Yeah,
with the underlying message being you can't earn a living drawing or painting or
absolutely.
doing whatever it is you choose to do. So we get a lot of those messages. I think too, for us, a lot of us as women, so many women start their small businesses while
Mhm.
they are raising their children, and
Yeah,
it's kind of takes a back seat to everything else. So it's not really a business.
yeah,
It's just something I do to earn a little extra money, or to so there's a lot of stuff going on there for sure.
yeah.
So how do we challenge some of those things that we've been hearing since day one? The idea, like, for me, one of the big things for me was a bad experience in a corporate environment that just made
Mm,
me like, I don't want anything that reminds me of that. I don't like using the term CEO in my business, or any of that, because
sure.
it just conjures up stuff I hated.
Right.
I think, you hit on another one, feeling weird about charging for our art.
Yes,
and the
absolutely.
whole idea of a capitalist system. I think women often come at, we come at things from a different perspective. We can see how building a business allows us to give back to other people. I think that's something that's very important
Hmm.
to a lot of women business owners. So,
Hmm.
but that doesn't necessarily fit with what our banker is telling us and what society is telling us and all those things. And so, how do we start to embrace the idea, challenge those mindset issues, start embracing the idea that it's okay for us as women and creatives to make money, and it's okay to make a lot of money if we choose to do so?
Yes.
How do
Yeah.
we align all those values and all of that that's going on there, and keep in mind that we've got a creative vision there? There's a lot going on.
It's a lot to carry around at once.
It is.
So, I mean, I think for me, part of it is just being super practical,
Mhm.
and awareness is the first piece. When I say that one line to people, do you get a T4 at the end of the year when it's time to file your taxes? Yes or no? And they say no. That is an awareness that they didn't have
Yeah,
before.
that's such a simple way to flick the switch, really.
Yeah, and it is that flipping of the switch. And so I think, excuse me, part of it is the awareness. And so then it's being aware of what are those other messages. So for you, I don't want to be a CEO because I had a terrible corporate
Mhm.
experience. Well, you don't ever have to call yourself a CEO because it's your business. And you could be making $27 million a year in your business and still not call yourself a CEO if you don't want to. Right. So I
Yes.
think there's that agency that um, with that awareness, then comes agency, and that also brings freedom. So, part of what I talk about in my book and part of what I talk about with my clients is much of what we do these days is about unlearning as much as it's about learning.
Yeah.
So, I want creatives to unlearn those outdated ideas of what they think it means to be a business owner. And so that to me is a big piece of this. And then it's just really, to some degree, I have a great deal of practicality to myself. So if I go back to thinking specifically about that singer songwriter who was in the first round
Mhm.
of that program, we were coming up to tax time, and she was agonizing, like for the entire part of the program. She was agonizing about needing to bring all of her expenses together and her income so that she could do her taxes. Well, a couple of things happened. One is she was actually able to reframe that to, this is self-care. And she, because it was so draining on her mental health, this thing that she had built up in her head.
Mhm.
So she went to her parents' house. They have a beautiful screened in deck. It was spring, the sun was shining. She lit candles. She had scents going. She had a cup of tea that she liked. And then she had this whole sort of um, event around gathering up her expenses in the shoebox and doing what needed to be done. So I think there's part of it is from a practical perspective, you just have to do the thing. And if you actually do that thing on a regular basis, it doesn't become this huge issue, this huge thing come tax time. And I think, and you had talked about this on a previous podcast as well, in terms of like, then the agency and the freedom that you have, if you're looking at these things on a regular basis, to be like, wow, my expenses have really increased. I need to look at my prices.
Mhm. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I have referenced that in a podcast we did. Oh gosh, it was one of the really early ones, but it was a podcast on self-care and how
Mm-hmm.
sometimes self-care isn't just about going to the spa or taking a day to read your favorite book while you eat chocolate on the couch. It's sometimes is doing those things like making the doctor's appointment, doing your taxes, filing your receipts and all those sort of grown
Absolutely.
up things, because
Yeah.
uh, leaving them to the point where it becomes this mountain that just gets bigger and bigger in our minds, that's not self-care. So it's not something we initially think of as self-care, but it really is in this
Yeah.
very odd way.
It is. And I think the other thing, like the other big issue that we tend to talk a lot about is that contributing to a capitalist society, right? And contributing to
Mhm.
capitalism. And
Yes, I want to get into this one. Yes.
I also think that's again where the practicality comes in for me. I have worked, I spent almost a decade working for a feminist organization. I made a decision early in my career that I would work within systems to change systems.
Mm.
And so that is, again, what I bring to this and these conversations that we have. Like, I mean, these are some of the most enjoyable things that I do in my life is have conversations with creatives about how to grow and build their businesses. And I think for me on that is when we recognize, like, we can choose to do one of two things. You can choose that you're not going to contribute, and so you can you can live in a way where you don't pay taxes and you don't um, collect or use the social supports, and I don't know, you are part of a cash economy. I don't think many people do that. Or you can choose to operate within this system intentionally and knowingly.
Yeah.
And then again, for me, it comes back to you are the business owner, so you get to make these choices. You get to choose that you are never going to call yourself a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
You also get to choose that you are going to do business differently. You're going, and whatever that looks like for you. But I believe that we can make change when we disrupt the systems.
Well, this is it. We're creatives. Like,
Hmm.
we can create the business that we want to have that runs the way that we want it to run. We don't have to do it the way that everyone else has been doing it for centuries. Um, while we do have to pay our taxes, and we do have to, depending on what you make, there might be certain legalities around it and things like that that we have to adhere to, but there's still an incredible amount of room to be creative in how we
Mm-hmm.
run our businesses. And just because somebody's been telling you for decades that you need to do it this way, and that doesn't mean that it's the only way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this is something I think that a lot of women, and I see this all the time, um we we're not, we're underserved, I think, by financial
Mm-hmm.
institutions and other organizations that are designed to help small businesses, because very often we are a one-woman shop.
Yeah.
We might be working from home. We may not have any interest right now in having a big office building or a place where
Mm-hmm.
we go to work, because we've chosen right now to be flexible in this period in our life. And so we don't fit. I think a lot of those institutions that have been out there for a while to help women don't really know how to deal with us. Or sorry, not to help women, but to help small
Yeah.
business owners. They
Yeah.
don't really know how to deal with women, because we're not coming in asking for a $10 million loan. Some of us are, but a lot of us aren't. We're coming in and saying, you know what, I just need $10,000, and the bank is like,
No.
things like that. So we get hit with a lot of messages that what we're doing may not be worthwhile or worthy, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it is worthwhile to us. And yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
So
There
I
really
think
is.
it's just I think that contributes a lot to the mindsets that we tend to have. It's like, well, I don't want to deal with the bank. There's a story that I tell in my previous business. I had a male business partner, but I managed the finance side of the business. That was my job. And I cannot tell you how many times when I would go to our bank and they would call me Mrs. Adeland, which was his last name. We're not married. We're not a couple. Or, been asked, where's your husband? Is he coming to this meeting? It's like, and I think we're constantly pushing back against those kinds of messages that we get every day. And so it can be a little difficult for us to change that mindset and realize that we have a lot of power. We just have to figure out how to use it. And maybe the way we use it is by working within those systems, as you mentioned, to make the changes we want to see.
Yeah. And really to just, I think when you were talking, it's like, yes. And it's no wonder that most women business owners I talk to, at some point, the conversation circles back to a struggle with confidence in one way, shape, or form or another. And, part of that is like when the world tells you that what you're doing isn't important, isn't valuable, is just like this little side thing that you're doing at your kitchen table. No wonder that erodes. And so I think that's where, again, finding community is so important. And whether that community is virtual or in person, or the community of listening to a podcast like this, where you realize that you're not alone. And I think the most empowering part of being an entrepreneur is also the most challenging part. And that is recognizing that you are the boss and you get to make the decisions.
Yes.
And it's so hard.
Yes.
And yet it is really empowering.
It is. And I think once we are able to get past that and realize, and for some of us, it's just a specific moment that happens where we realize, you know what, I said this is going to be how it's going to be. And guess what? It worked out. So maybe I can say that again. And it starts to build your confidence. So, how can we start to embrace being a business owner? Because as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of us, if we're asked what we do, we say, I'm a writer, I'm an illustrator, I'm a whatever it is we've chosen to do. But very few of us will actually come out and say, I'm a business owner, or because somehow it doesn't go with I'm a writer. But how do we get to the point where we embrace the business owner side of it as much as we do the creative side of it? So we could come to, when somebody says, what do? You say, oh, I am a small business owner. And I write novels, or, because we never put those two things in a sentence together.
I think, baby steps is one. Awareness is where we want to start with that. And I also think you don't actually need to admit that to anyone else except for yourself.
Yeah.
If your brand, your persona, who you are is an artist or a writer or a comedian or whatever it is, it's really only important that you are able to acknowledge that to yourself. If you want to get to the place where it's like, I am a business owner and a writer, that's wonderful, but it doesn't have to be the case. I think it's like we just, in community development, which I've done a lot of over my life, we always talk about you meet people where they're at. And so I think as ourselves, we meet ourselves where we're at. So if you're at the place where you've not even ever considered the fact that you're a business owner before, and you're going to, a fall market on Saturday, you don't have to introduce yourself as a business owner, because that gap is probably too great.
Right.
So it's getting comfortable with it yourself. And then the more comfortable you get with it, the more it becomes part of your identity and not just something that you're trying on.
Yeah.
And then I think the other piece around that is recognizing that for most of us, the businessy side of business doesn't have to, nor should it take over your life. And I teach people how to plan in their business. That is my jam. And so I support business owners to make plans that are flexible and nimble, yet solid and based on, what makes sense for you in terms of whether it's your numbers or whatever. And so I think when I think about it that way, it's reassuring people that this is not going to take over your life. At the stage of business where most of us are, we can do 90 minutes of planning once a quarter and take a look at that once every 2 weeks. That's all you need to do.
Yeah,
So
that's not overwhelming. Like if you
no,
break it
just let
down like that, it's
right.
very manageable.
And that's it. You started this endeavor, whether it's a business or an art practice or whatever you want to call it. You started this because you have a desire to put your unique creativity into the world. And your business should not constrict your ability to do that. It should expand your ability to do that.
Yeah.
And that's where a little bit of attention to the planning, a little bit of attention to the business building will allow for that, because you're not all wadded up in a ball for 3 months thinking about the day that you're going to have to go through the shoebox with all of the tax information.
Absolutely. If you are constantly, it's very hard to create when in the back of your head you're thinking about your shoebox of receipts, right?
Exactly.
But if you make a specific time once a week or once a month to go through that shoebox, you can put it in a compartment over here in your brain, because you know that that's the thing I do on the last Monday of the month or whatever. And then you have all the other days of the month to focus on other things. So I know from your book that you are a big believer in systems, and I am too. So, and I think systems give us freedom. I really do.
Yes,
And
me
you've
too.
just alluded to that right there. So, what are some of the core systems that you think all business owners and entrepreneurs need to embrace, no matter how big you are or how tiny your niche is? What are the top three things, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, that
Well,
you think?
I mean, I think in terms of systems processes, it is having that 90-day plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really simple. You just, you look a year out, what is your vision? Where do you want to be? And then pull that back to your 90 days and take a look at it every 2 weeks. That, if you do nothing else but that, that it's going to have a profound impact. I think, regardless of what stage we're at, we need to have either a spreadsheet or a software that has your accounting. So even like where I'm at in my business, I use QuickBooks Online. I've got a
Mm-hmm.
bookkeeper, I've got an accountant, all that stuff. I still have a spreadsheet that says SRL 2022 budgets and projections.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be able to see what is coming up for me. I want to be able to have that at a glance. So I think that's really important. And again, that will depend on where your revenues are coming from. So, if you are selling cards like you are, you may be looking at what are my projections for, Etsy versus your website versus something else. You'll really want to play around with it. But I think having some sort of at a glance document that helps you see what is happening in your business is really important. And then in terms of other, I think we can get really, as much as I really think that systems are important in a business, we can get bogged down with them really easily. And the other one that I think is really important is like an email marketing software and a system for how do you communicate with your audience. So really, whatever your marketing plan is, for most of us, we never get away from the need for sales and marketing, and being intentional about that, not feeling like you need to do everything. But if there was the one thing, it's really is your email,
Yeah.
capturing emails as being probably most critical.
Yeah, I would agree on all three. It's funny that you mentioned a couple of things there that just resonated. I use QuickBooks as well. I have a bookkeeper and an accountant, but I also have a paper planner. And at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of every month, I just have one little page in my planner where I have fill in um, revenue from the previous month from each of my revenue streams. I
Yeah.
have a spot for what I want it to be this month, and I just, keep track of where I am in terms of my gross revenue, my net revenue, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And it's just a little page in my planner. For me, writing it down physically is that's just how my brain works. I need to
Yeah.
to do that for myself, but there's like, it doesn't have to be fancy at all.
Right.
But I find doing that every month just kind of reinforces like I'm on the right track, or I
Exactly.
can
It keeps it top of mind.
yeah.
And I think sometimes people really struggle with projections
Yeah.
and revenues and sales. Well, how am I supposed to know? I hear that all the time. Well, how am I supposed to know? Well, when I do a visioning, if I'm going to do that 90-day plan with someone, the the revenue target is in the visioning
Mm-hmm.
section of the work. I'm
Yes.
not asking you in this moment on, September or October of 20, whatever year we're in, 22, what your revenues are going to be in May of 2023. We want to have that vision for where do we want to get to. And that will allow us some expansiveness to imagine how we're going to get there. And the fact that you keep your past revenues for the last month and also what that target is, just the act of writing that down, I think there's something about that kicks your brain into gear and just keeps it sort of ticking along. It keeps it top of mind without it screaming at you. It's not screaming at you,
No,
but
no, not
you're
at all.
aware of it.
It's just working in the background. Our brains are
Yeah,
really good at working on a lot of different things in the background. And so
exactly.
it's just kind of a subliminal message back there, like, what have
Yeah.
you done for your revenue this month, kind of thing. Are you thinking, especially because I tend to have a bit of shiny object syndrome, and
Oh,
I find
me too.
I want to go off in this direction, I want to do this now, and my brain is back there going, you have some targets that you wanted to meet this month, like let's think about that. How is that going to impact that? So I think that's super simple. It's really easy to do, whether you're a spreadsheet person or a planner person or however it works for you. And you mentioned another one, that sometimes the systems can really, we can get so wrapped up in the systems we lose the bigger picture. And one of the things I make is planner stickers, and I see this all the time. Like, people are fascinated by how other people plan
Hmm.
and are constantly trying out new systems to find the one that works for them. And they get so caught up in trying out all the different, should I use Asana? Should I use Trello? Have
Yeah.
you tried this planner? What about this planner? And they
Hmm.
forget that that they need to create some stuff, and that they're running a business because they're so caught up in finding the perfect system. And so I think you just have to start with one thing and go, and at some point you might want to
Yeah.
change it. That's fine. But yeah, you
And I
can't like,
think it's like demystifying that stuff, right? When you talk about like, what are your systems and processes? It's like, well, that sounds really overwhelming. I don't know. Do I have any? But when kind of pull that back to, you can use a Hilroy scribbler like you did in grade
Mhm.
5. You
Yeah.
just, it does not matter. And you're right. And I am, I often call myself a like recovering shiny object
You ever
syndrome.
recover? I don't know.
And sometimes I'm not recovering. So I really resonate with that. And I have tried all of the things over the years. And I think that for me, that's part of it is I'm not a naturally organized person. I teach people how to plan. I teach people how to, put order into their business. And the reason why I'm good at that is because I'm not a naturally organized person. I have tried all of the things. And and I think, the answer to that is the one that works for you.
Yeah.
And to your point, like just stop switching, like just make the decision. And the action is really what's most important. The plan is just kind of to help you figure out where you're going.
Yeah.
But you can have the most beautiful plan in the whole world. If you don't actually act on it, then it's not a very beautiful plan.
No, it's just something sitting on a piece of paper somewhere. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I think I was 45 by the time I just realized, you know what? The way that works for you is just to write things down. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you stop trying all these
Yeah.
online systems and things. They just go with the one that works. And so that's what I do now. And it's so much easier when you just embrace the one that works, even if it's not the cool one.
Right. Yeah. We don't all
Yeah.
need to have bullet journals and stuff.
Bullet journals are so pretty though, but yeah.
They are so.
Okay. So yeah, it doesn't have to be like this fancy, crazy, intricate system plan, but you do. You have to have a plan for where you want to go.
Also
You
still use a paper planner, but I also use it because I have a team. So I go back and forth between the two.
yeah.
But yeah, there's nothing I love more than multicolored markers
Oh, I
and a
know, and
planner.
stickers and all the things.
Hmm.
It's yes. So that's
So
why I
fun.
make them for other people now. So I still get to play with them, but not maybe use them as much myself. But
Amazing.
yeah, it doesn't have to be super complicated. You need to have some way to set some goals and think ahead. You need to have some way to manage your money, and those are the two really
Yeah.
important things, I think, for most businesses.
Yeah.
um so so how do we keep going on those days that are really hard, or when we're questioning whether we're cut out for this, or whether we creatives all have those moments where we're like, oh my god, I'm a hack, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know why people like my work. How can I run a business with this when I'm not even good at it?
Yeah.
We tend to have we tend to get caught up in our heads a lot. So how do you work with your clients, or even with yourself, to keep going on those days where you're just feeling like I'm hopeless?
Yeah. And so I think one of the things I talk about in the way that my book is designed is I talk a lot about sort of the big picture strategic ideas, and then drill right down into like, and here's a simple tactic. Here's one thing you can do today that will make a difference. And one of the things for that very purpose is an idea that I call be kind and gentle yet firm with yourself. And so on those days when you're really struggling, then I would say be kind and gentle with yourself. Beating yourself up, shaming and blaming yourself is not going to get the creative juices flowing, but perhaps a walk outside will, or perhaps a bath, or perhaps a belly laugh with your mother. I don't know, whatever what is going to release your creative juices. And so I think that piece is being kind and gentle with yourself in that moment or on that day when you're having a hard time. The firm comes in. So we want to be nice to ourselves, and we're often not very nice to
No,
ourselves.
yes, you're
Well,
right.
and in that, like when you talk about creatives, it's like, would you ever, if a colleague of yours or a creative friend said, would you give me feedback on this? You're never going to give them the feedback that you give yourself.
No, we would never call a creative friend a creative hack. Like, we would never
No,
say that to them.
no, you wouldn't. So why do we say that to ourselves? So I
Yeah.
think that's like the kind and gentle is stop being mean to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Being mean to yourself is not going to make you creative. So just stop and do what you know will help you. And I mean, for me, I live in the country. I need to go outside and be in nature when I'm
Mhm.
stuck. The firm comes in because, as soon as I say that to people, they're like, but then I'll be like laying on the couch watching Netflix for a week. It's like, well, no, that's where firm comes into play. And so the firm is, I'm being kind and gentle with myself right now. And now, what is it that I need to do to get myself back on track?
Yeah.
And, uh, perhaps it's cleaning your studio. If you know that you want to create a new piece, but your studio is a mess, well, clean your studio. That's
Mhm.
the firm, is do the thing that you know you need to do, in order to move forward. It's not creative at all, but in the summertime, I go through this every year. My husband is a lobster fisherman. We have a ton of bills come into our house in May and June and in July, but like, he makes the lion's share of his money, his yearly income, in a couple of months. And as a result, a ton of bills comes in at that time. And I diligently pay them every 2 weeks because you can't even wait a month. There's so many of them. And then in July, I'm like, I can't be arsed to pay any of the bills. It happens every year. And then it's August. I'm like, oh, I haven't paid the bills yet. And I'm now beating myself up about not paying the bills. And I'm a terrible human. And, surely something catastrophic is going to happen. My husband is going to be mad at me. And so this year, um, the firm, I just broke it down. And one day, all I did was open all the envelopes.
Oh, there you go.
That
Small
was it.
steps.
That was like,
Yeah.
okay, all I'm doing today is opening the envelopes. And that was as firm as I could be with myself. But that was all I needed to do. And then the next day, I was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. So what is your version of opening the envelopes when you're having that creative block?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Baby steps.
Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are often very horrible to ourselves. We say things to ourselves we would never say to another human being. Not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
We do need to be kinder with ourselves. But you are right. There needs to be a firm component to that,
Yeah.
because otherwise I would be lying on the couch watching Netflix. But
Yeah.
yes,
And Melissa, sometimes we do experience things that we need to be kind and gentle with ourselves for months at a time,
yes,
and so if that's the case, then that's where we want to get to laser focus. So, and another example from my own life, this time last year, my cousin, who's a dear, dear friend of mine, ended up dying of cancer. And it was a world rocker. It was and that was not a be kind and gentle with yourself for a day and then get the hell back to work.
yeah.
That was months and months and months of really not being okay. And so being aware, and I was actually like in the time when she was like in the dying process last year, I was in Quebec with her. Um, I was also writing my book, and I was at the editing, or like the proofreading stage of my book. So it was almost done.
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't want that to get slowed down. And so I narrowed my focus to, I'm proofreading this book and I'm doing my client calls. And that is it.
Yeah.
I am not on social media. I am not marketing. I am not sending emails to anybody. I am not soliciting new work. This is what I'm doing. And so I think we also have to recognize that if there's something going on that's really big, we still have to be kind and gentle with ourselves, but maybe we need to really cut away all of the noise to like, what do I need to do to keep the wheels on this bus while I give myself time to grieve or heal or, clean my mother's house because she had hip replacement surgery, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, and there's lots of instances. It could be as your situation where you are spending the final days with somebody who you really care about,
Yeah.
and then going through the grieving process. We don't grieve in a week.
No,
Like, let's be
we
really
really
up.
don't.
It doesn't, I mean, I read somewhere once that when you go through a major life change, like grieving the loss of somebody very close to you, that you shouldn't make a major decision for an entire year after that,
Yeah.
because your headspace is just not
Yeah.
right. So it could be having a child, it could be
Yeah.
going through burnout, it could even be moving from one end of the country to the other. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
those are big life things,
Yeah.
and they're not one and done in a day kind of thing
No,
at all.
and I think that's the thing is we need to, and that's where again it always comes back to planning for me.
Mhm.
Um, it's figuring out like if having that laser focus of like these are the things that I'm doing because I don't want to go back, when you've moved through whatever it is that you've moved through,
Mhm.
you want to go back to a business that is relatively intact or it's
Mhm.
not, you don't have to start all over again. And I also think there's that recognition that for lots of artists and creatives, depending on what your practice is, um, some of these big things do impact that. So giving yourself the space as well to experience that, right? Like if you've got writer's block, what do you need to do to move through the writer's block? What if your art practice has really changed because your worldview has changed? So I think, just being, well, I always just keep saying being kind to ourselves because we're not always very kind.
Exactly. Yeah. When I first became self-employed, within my first year, my father had a heart attack that
Mm-hmm.
also led to a significant brain trauma. So he was in the hospital for 3 months,
Yeah.
and I was the one who was looking after him. And in some ways, it was not fun to go through. I certainly would not
Mm-hmm.
want anyone to ever have to go through something like that. But in some ways, going through it in the first year of my business
Mm.
was really eye-opening, because it made me realize, um, yes, like getting laser, I had to get laser focused. I didn't have a choice.
Exactly.
But I also realized just how important it was to have a support network around
Yep.
me. And this is one of the things that you also talk about. And I truly believe this is one of the most important things we can do for ourselves as women business owners, as women creatives, is, I was very fortunate in that I had somebody who I was quite close to, in terms of having like a business, like a business bestie, for lack
Yeah.
of a better word,
Sure.
who was able to take on some of my client work and keep
Yeah.
things going for me and things like that. But if I hadn't had that person, I don't know what I would have done. So
Mm.
why is it so, like, you talk about supporting other creative women and their businesses, but I think sometimes we get a little bit stuck in a bit of a competitive mindset, where we're like,
Mm.
she's my competitor, and there'll be less for me if she does well, or what if my clients love her and never come back to me, or whatever the case may
Yeah,
be. um
absolutely.
you know I think we tend to come from a bit of a scarcity mindset, and yet having that support network is so important at every step of the way. So what, I'm gonna just let you go with this one. What are your thoughts on all
Well,
of this?
I have so many thoughts. And so part of it, Melissa, is um, going back to that unlearning. And I talk a lot about a feminist business strategy as an alternative to that like button up masculine idea that we have about business. And sometimes when we look at things like this, I really want to encourage you and other people who are listening to this to think about what of this is yours to own and what of it is what you have been socialized and taught. And so the socialization of women is and men and it starts when we are sorted into pink and blue onesies,
Yeah.
and it is unrelenting in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And women are really taught to, we are taught to judge ourselves. The boxes that women are to play in are very small. We are socialized to be good mothers, good partners, good martyrs, putting everyone else's needs ahead of our own. And that is the patriarchal system in which we live. And the patriarchy is sneaky. And one of the things that it does really well is gets us to do its business for it. And so us judging other women for all of the millions of ways that we judge other women is really ensuring that this system of oppression continues on. So part of it is pulling back and going, oh yeah, this is not all about me. This is the world in which we have all grown up and been socialized. And so I can choose to actively reject those messages that I hear and that I've grown up with.
Yep. I'm nodding my head so vigorously.
Okay,
right
so
now.
that's sort of part one is recognizing what is yours to own and what is just the soup of misogyny that we grew up in. And then from there, it is an active decision.
Yeah.
And it is one that, in my experience, so I grew up in a bubble. I will fully admit I grew up in a bubble. I grew up in a bubble, or I spent most of my career in a bubble where I worked for a feminist organization. My job was to support other women. I was surrounded by other colleagues in that organization and in the community whose jobs it was to support other women. And I went to a conference one time, and someone asked a Q&A, and she said, what do you do when you don't feel supported by other women? And I was so blown away by the question. What do you mean you don't feel supported by other women? Like, I realize now that my experience is very different than other people's. So I think part of it is that sort of recognizing what's yours, what's theirs, and then actually just making an intentional decision. In my experience, women tend to gravitate toward collaborative experiences and collaborative opportunities. And so in that, do we resist? Well, what happens if I ask for help and the client prefers them? What happens if it's that real shift of mindset that there is an abundance and there is space for everyone? And that is the antithesis of that military-inspired business strategy where we are all competing for finite resources. We're not.
No,
we're not competing.
We're not.
So
Yes.
part of it is just telling yourself that. And when those feelings bubble up, to recognize them, bless and release the feelings, and then I think then as you put yourself in the situation where you get to meet your business bestie, or you get to go to a conference and find out that these other women are having similar experiences, like those are your people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't found them yet, keep looking, because they're there.
They are.
Yeah.
And there's a lot there, but recognizing that we are in a place of abundance because we are. And I fall into this trap all the time. I have to remind myself probably once a week, like, stop it. There's more than enough to go around. It's okay. And one of the things that I have noticed is that when you treat the world like it's an abundant place, you start to see abundance everywhere. And Absolutely. It really does kind of compound, I guess, for lack of a better term. But yes, having that support network, it doesn't mean you have to love everybody that you meet or anything like that, but you will find your people, the ones that you resonate with, and having any kind of network where you feel like you're safe, or like you can have those big conversations. I've mentioned before on the podcast, I have a mastermind group with a for other women, and that's my safe place. They're my
Absolutely.
women, right?
Yeah.
I'd be quite lost without them. But it took a while to find that,
Yeah.
and once you have it, really value it. And I do think it's important for us to visibly support other women and their
Yes.
businesses. I really do, because we have enough challenges as it is without having
Hmm.
to.
Yeah. Doing the work of the patriarchy.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. That's, yeah, you're
Well,
right.
and I think the other thing too, for because it can sound, what we're talking about, which I fully embrace, can sound pretty woo.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is also important to acknowledge is that you can have collaboration and competition at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And the example that I would give on that is again, back to my fishing family. My husband is also a commercial fisherman, and he is no longer, but before COVID, he did tuna charters. So Atlantic bluefin tuna, they're giant. They can be up to 1,000 pounds. It is like a bucket list experience for certain people. And there is a fleet of charter boats on PEI. Not very many of them. I'm going to say there's 20 or 30, let's say. They all compete with each other for clients. And when they get the clients here and they are out on the boat, they collaborate with each other every step of the way. The Gulf of St. Lawrence is a giant body of water, and you are a tiny little boat bobbing around, and you've got a client on, and you want to have the best experience for them. So my husband is going to call you up and say, I saw fish bouncing at the 510 line, and you go down there and you have a great experience for your client. And the next day you tell my husband, so there's this, because not only they are competing for their for their revenues from the
Mm-hmm.
clients, they're collaborating both to catch the fish, but they're also collaborating on this, to build a good reputation for this sector, because
Yeah.
this is an international, the clients come from around the world. So
Yeah.
I think if we're able to frame it around like that, like you may be part of an Etsy market, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so it would be really easy to envision that the people who are in that hall or that room are your competition. Sure, in one way they are, but in another way, how can you reframe that to how do we collaborate? How do we work together to make sure that the most people come through this door so that
Mm-hmm.
everyone has an opportunity to have that amazing client who buys your product?
Absolutely. One industry where, and I came across this a lot in my previous business, that is so good at this. It's not a female dominated industry, it's actually male dominated, but it's the craft brewery industry, particularly here on the
Mm-hmm.
West Coast.
Yeah.
They are so collaborative, and yet they
Yeah.
are all competing, but they
Right.
recognize that their customer doesn't just want to try one beer, they want to try them all. Like, the more
Yes.
choice there is, the more variety, the more vibrant the industry is, the more people it draws in. And I really find that quite remarkable. It's very
Mm-hmm.
refreshing, actually,
Yeah.
to be around people who operate that way.
Yeah.
And I think there's room for all of us to do that in whatever creative niche we are in. If you're a writer, people who read books love to read. They want more books. They don't care who writes
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So the more vibrant the publishing industry is, the better it is for readers. The more readers there are, the better it is for the publishing industry. And so on. Same with music. Same, any
Yeah.
kind of entertainment. When we're watching Netflix and we've binged that show, what are we doing? We're like, well, where's the next show? I need another show. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's lots of room there for all of us.
And really the benefit of finding your people is just so valuable. Like you
Mhm.
said, you don't know what you would do without your mastermind. I had a friend here, this morning, who came to my house, and we've known each other for probably almost 10 years. And And she's a dear friend of mine that started as a vendor relationship.
Mm.
And in our conversation this morning, I was able to help her through a challenge that she was having. And then when that was all said and done, we flipped over to me and I talked about something that was bugging me and we
Yeah.
got that all sorted out and off she went, like, and those are the kinds of conversations that it's
Yes.
hard to have with someone who doesn't have, at least, I mean, our businesses are very different, but it's that shared experience of being a business owner.
Absolutely. Just having somebody that you can bounce ideas off with,
Mm-hmm.
or tell them when you're stuck, and maybe they can help unstick you and things like that. And it's the thing to remember, I think, that's important is that people don't show up at your doorstep wanting to be part of your network. Like, we do
Mm-hmm.
need to make an effort to go out there
Yeah.
and find other women to talk to, and whether that's going to networking events or joining a Facebook group of women who are, if you're not the type of person who loves to go out or anything, but there are so many avenues where you can find other women. It could be as simple as seeing another woman doing something really cool and reaching out to her and saying, I love what you do. Like, this is
Yeah,
great.
absolutely.
I guarantee you she'll be thrilled that somebody reached out to her and said, I love what you do. So
Exactly.
yes. Oh, Sara, thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation. Um, for everybody who is listening, where can people find you online?
Well, you can find me in all the usual places. Instagram is where I like to hang out, probably the most. So, and I'm just S Roach Lewis on Instagram. And you can go to my website. It's sherules.biz. And there you can see some of the things that I do. And there's a place where you can download a couple of free chapters of the book. So you can check it out and see if it's something that you'd like to dig into a little bit more. Or you can just buy it there as well.
Yes, I'm about halfway through. It's a very easy read, everyone, and there
Yes.
is a lot in there to make you think. So I
Yeah.
am looking forward to finishing it. You also have a program, and I just
Yes.
had it on my
So
screen.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, there it is. I had it on my screen, the actual title of it. I wanted to get it right. So it's the 9490 course that
Yes.
you have, and you are offering our audience a 50% discount. We will put a link to that in the show notes, but maybe you could tell them a little bit about what that is.
Sure. That is the what I've been talking about this whole show. It's 90 minutes to plan the next 90 days in your business. And so with that, it is just an on-demand workshop. You get a workbook as well. And in 90 minutes, you will have a plan for your next 3 months. And then I will pop into your inbox once every 2 weeks to remind you to do your sprint review and give you a little bit more nuance to some of the training.
Awesome. So that is something that you can all check out. It's very generous of Sara to offer a discount like that. I will make sure to put the link to it in the show notes, along with everywhere else that you can find Sara online. And yeah, thank you. This has been great. I really appreciate your time today.
Me too. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation.
It's been great. That's it for this week, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back again soon with another new episode, and we will talk to you all then. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.